Welcome to 2016 Presidential Candidate Interviews. Today I am interviewing K. Ross Newland. Mr. Newland is running as a Republican. Hello, Mr. Newland, and welcome to the interview. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, sir, and thank you for the interview.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for participating. We're going to start out with some easy icebreaker questions, just so people can get to know you as a person. Number one, can you describe your family and your home life?
Pretty easy to do. I'm a single guy who does normal single things. There's really not much more to me than that. I'm a pretty normal human being. So.
All right. Describe your employment, your work experience, your employment history.
Well, now that becomes a little less normal and a little more complicated. And a lot of things in my life overrun each other, and we're going to try and keep this short because I know these are the icebreaker questions, and we do want to get to politics. So, I was born and raised in Michigan, the youngest of 6 kids, and then my mother actually accidentally shot my father to death when I was 2.5 years old. And she remarried, and we got 4 more kids. So at one time, there were 10 of us, of which I was the youngest. I graduated from Hartford High School in 1976, went into the Navy in January of 77, stayed there for 9 years, 3 months, and 5 days, not that anybody counts. I also spent time while I was in the Navy working in the movie and film industry and theater. And when I got out, I pursued that for a long period of time, did 42 television commercials and 8 movies, also ran my own model and talent agency in Charleston, South Carolina. And just about the time that I quit working at the shipyard, which I was also doing, fixing submarines. I was in the submarine fleet when I was in the Navy. So when I left the shipyard and started running my business full-time, Hurricane Hugo came in, destroyed the foundation upon which I was building my business, and so shortly thereafter went through some hard times and spent a couple of years homeless, living in a warehouse. Built my first Christian youth center in that warehouse while I was living there. It was an 11,000 square foot indoor skateboard park with a huge concert stage and pool tables and ping pong tables. And then I started working at golf courses. Actually became a golf pro for a couple of years and moved back to Michigan to help my mother out when she was going through some surgeries and stuff and couldn't find qualifying work, so quit becoming a golf pro. Took over pastoring my first church in Michigan, and then have been ever since helping ministries and churches that have died to revitalize, and I currently pastor a church in Rockford, Illinois. And that's about that.
All right, what are your hobbies and interests?
Well, obviously I play golf, and my real interests are, frankly, Christ-oriented. Teaching Bible study, trying to get Christians back on a path of really following the plans of Jesus. And that really is my entire life for the most part.
Do you have a favorite place to eat out?
Not exactly a favorite. I guess my favorite thing to do is have a Royal Burger at, what's the name of that place now? Steak and Shake. I tend to eat at McDonald's more often than not. When you spend a little time homeless, you discover that a couple of McDoubles and a sweet tea is a good meal when you have no money. So that's sort of become a habit that I am trying desperately to get out of. And then, of course, when I'm down south, I love to eat at Smoky Bones, best restaurant in the world.
You may have already answered this, but do you have a favorite fast food joint?
Yeah, I was sort of in there. I guess the Steak and Shake probably is a favorite.
Do you have a favorite junk food like potato chip, candy bar, or some kind of food you would never let someone see you eating at 2 a.m. in the morning?
I really don't. I spend quite a bit of time working out and trying to take care of myself, and that's why I stay away from McDonald's more often than I used to. I had a triple bypass surgery when I was 52 years old, and so I do try to avoid some of that.
Do you have any favorite TV shows or movies?
I'm a sci-fi nut, so Star Trek has always been a biggie for me, and Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who. Just funny, crazy stuff. And then the one thing I shouldn't admit, because I am trying to appeal to my Christian brothers and sisters, but I do watch The Walking Dead.
Okay. Do you have any pets, dogs, cats, reptiles, pet rocks?
No.
Nothing. Okay. Name a song that you would consider maybe a life anthem, a motto, something that represents you.
It is Well With My Soul.
All right. That's the end of the icebreaker questions. We'll get into the stuff that really matters. Hopefully people care about these, too. Why are you running for president?
Well, I think I started down the path for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we sort of live in a nation where poor people, which I'm familiar with, and undercapitalized entrepreneurs, which I am familiar with, are really harmed by and even exploited by government and our society as a whole. And then secondly, because I am a Christian, and I really believe in this gentle, kind, loving Jesus who, wouldn't extinguish a smoking flax or bend a gentle reed. And I do not comprehend how Christians have wound up becoming so aggressive and arrogant and in their approach towards sinners. And for that reason, I just wanted that there's nobody who runs for president who represents me. And that is the idea that we should all be peacemakers. That this nation doesn't need to be run like it's a corporation, and it doesn't need to be run like some kind of dictatorship or ruling people. We really need somebody who will lead people and run the nation more like a family. I think families in America are about the only ones who have ever actually balanced the budget, and they know exactly what to and what not to do. But I also think we just need a president who will lead people away from this aggressive society that we have now. It just seems like everybody in America and in politics is really trying to use the government to force their opinion on other people. And I frankly believe America has enough room for everybody, all religions and lifestyles, to live in peace together. And myself as a Christian, and I hopefully all Christians, will begin to realize that we're supposed to be the ones who live at peace with all men. And so while there are so many different voices out there just causing these little civil wars and tearing stuff apart, and presidential candidates who add to that, who literally fuel the frustration and anger in order to get followers. I think somewhere in the midst of that, there are a bunch of Christians like myself who are not represented and who want someone who actually will speak the words that might even bring a revival to our churches, as well as peace to the nation. And so that's why I'm running.
What abilities do you bring to the office of president?
What abilities do I bring to the office of president? I see the problems from a different position. And because of that, I have a slightly different ideology. So I don't come to the office of president as somebody who is one of the rich elite or a career politician. I come with the idea of being able to empathize and actually feel what the average American person feels. And so certain things that I see going on with government right now, Social Security is probably a classic example. It gets a lot of mouth service, but the truth is nobody wants to really fix it, because none of the people who are in position to fix it, their parents aren't living off of Social Security. They're all quite well off, and they're living off of other money, whereas my mom, it absolutely leans on that check, and when it's late or somebody threatens it, then that becomes a serious problem for her. So I think for me personally, I've been blessed with poverty. I've been blessed with being an quintessential undercapitalized entrepreneur, and therefore I bring an entirely different point of view to the position of president, while at the same time having an understanding of how to run a business and having the understanding of what the government can do to make things better for poor people and for the undercapitalized entrepreneur.
Are there any presidents that you look on with a certain amount of favor, ones that you like? And if there are, what aspects of how they governed would you try and emulate?
The very first one that always comes to mind for me is Abraham Lincoln. Lately, I've been reading more and more of his speeches and things that he wrote and said. And one of the things I notice of him, really two things. I really do believe that in many ways our country keeps balanced on the precipice of civil wars. And so the result of that being... my phone's going off because I turned it back on after...
Don't worry, you're not the only one. Had a guy earlier today.
No. Yeah, well, anyway, so for when in reading his stuff, the one thing I noticed is that he always looked at both sides. He never looked at anybody as being his enemy. And I think because of that, he really led the nation more like it was a family, more like, people who disagreed passionately with each other, but who ought not to keep fighting with each other. And so Abraham Lincoln in that regard, and then I think Ronald Reagan, and probably for the same reason. A lot of the things Ronald Reagan did were actually very good things. The problem is that Congress wasn't necessarily with him. That's one of our big issues, is if we ever bring more money into the government, then the government will just figure out how to spend it. And somewhere along the line, we have to be able to trust, if a Republican president like me, for instance, would have to be able to trust the Republicans not to spend more money because there is more money. But I think Ronald Reagan is very favored in many people's hearts because he was down to earth and straightforward, and he was almost like a father figure to the nation. He literally just emulated a certain aspect of kindness and gentleness and peacefulness. And obviously in foreign policy, that worked very well for him.
Are there any presidents that you don't look at with any amount of favor who had things in their presidency that you would not want to emulate? And can you name some of these things and some of these people?
You know what? My mommy always...
In the kindest manner possible.
My mommy always told me if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Our most recent presidents, a number of them are people who I think lost track of what America is supposed to be. I think some of them have truly tried to become dictatorial, have tried to force a moral rule on the people from both aspects. And I think if we're going to be the nation that our founding fathers established, we need to fundamentally return to the idea that the American people can decide for themselves what their morals are, and that we really can all live in peace together. And so I find the divisiveness of all of the presidencies lately to be something that I do not want to emulate. I really would like to see a ton less government in our personal lives, as well as allowing people to establish their own ethics and morals for their businesses. And so I don't want to emulate pretty much anything I've seen.
Okay. That probably leads into the next few questions. Are there any functions of government you would like to decrease or even abolish, and why?
Well, I think without a doubt, I'd like to see government out of personal life. I'd like to see the American people step up and take care of other people, and that's a place where the Christian church has really failed. If we're really going to return this country to what it was founded to be, the Christian church will have to become what it was established to be before. And that's not necessarily a religious point of view. It's just that 70% of our population still claim to be Christians. Now, whether they're Christians or not or no is debatable. It's not the point. The point is they don't hate Jesus. And this nation is founded on kind of a precedence that the people would take care of themselves and government would not be taking care of them. And so the Christian church, who are literally been given the call to take care of the widows and orphans, the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the naked, they need to step back up. And that aspect, along with trying to force morality upon the American people, we've reached a point now where there are leaders who not only, I mean, if they were just warring against homosexuals, that would be one thing, but they're not. They're warring against Christians who disagree with them, trying to use the government for that purpose. And that's just something that we need to get away from. We need to get away from the government establishing how people's morals and get back to doing things the way Jesus said to do them.
Are there any functions of government you would like to add to or increase? Any departments that need to be added? Any cabinet positions? Or anything within the cabinet positions and parts of government you would want to increase?
Well, I probably neglected something from the previous question. I'd like to see the IRS go away. And the idea of a fair tax so that there isn't a multi-billion-dollar industry out there sucking money out of people to do taxes. But I would like to see Social Security in many ways increased for our senior citizens. I think more than anything, America has started to treat its senior citizens like they're disposable, like they're not important. We've used them up, and now we can throw them away. And we're really talking about the people who built our skyscrapers and our cities and our bridges and our roads, the people who scrubbed our toilets and scrubbed the floors, for that matter, and washed the windows. And that Social Security should be there even more as a reward, not just as an insurance, and so I've put together a fair tax, and we're probably about to get to that. I could almost go step by step down here, but I've put together a fair tax plan that includes funding Social Security in such a way that we would recover it within a year of establishing the new tax. We would have $1 trillion in Social Security and never ever have to deal with it again. So I think our biggest thing is to get the American people to take care of each other, but we do need to reward, particularly the poor working folk, for the fact that they sat out there and they killed themselves for 50 years of labor, and we should make sure that when they are too old to work, that they're still taken care of.
Would you like to further describe your stance on taxation and...
Yeah, because I vacillated back and forth on use taxes or flat tax, and the use tax, I love the idea of a use tax because it would tax drug dealers and it would tax people who make their money under the table. But at the same time, by the time you take the basics out of a tax, because I don't want the poor to be dealing with a tax. So if we could take clothing out and we could take medicines out and we could take food out of a use tax would be okay. But my real preference is I'd like to just see a flat tax. And my flat tax is 20%, and some people go, oh my gosh, 20%. Ben Carson only said 10%. The truth is that when you add Social Security into that and into the taxes that the American people pay right now, they all have more than 20% of their taxes taken out at the beginning of the things before they actually go through spending all of that money to be able to get some money back. And so 20% is not unreasonable, but this is the difference. I would give a refund to every person in America on their first $20,000 income. So if you make $20,000 or less, you would have zero taxes that you would pay. If you made $40,000, you would actually only pay 10% in taxes. And then a fourth of that, 5%, would be going straight to Social Security. Now, right now, Social Security taxes at a little higher rate, but they only tax you till you make $118,000, and anything over that is not taxed for Social Security. I'd get away from that altogether. Put together the 20% tax and let it be there so that even that person who makes $20,000 and pays 0% of his money in as taxes, that $20,000 will still count for his Social Security income, so that when it comes down to the time when he's too old to be able to work, we'll still be able to take care of him. 5% for 1 year will bring in about $2 trillion. So after you get done with that, then literally we can drop that part of the tax down to 2%. I'd like to keep the other 15% of the flat tax until we pay off an $18 trillion debt. Once again, 5% brings $2 to $3 trillion a year in. So that 5%, we could pay off the entire $18 trillion debt within 9 or 10 years. And get that off of the backs of our young people. It is still a tax that puts all of the burden on everybody who makes over $100,000 a year, but it reduces all of their taxes, with the exception, of course, of the ones who have just been able to completely avoid paying any taxes. And I think the wealthy of America would embrace the idea of it. I really believe that is not a problem, because fundamentally we will get down to 10% going to for income tax, and then 2 or 3% would be covering Social Security. And then we have to compete with the rest of the world for business, all for far too long, and there are still too many Americans who believe that it is a privilege to do business in America. We need for the American people to understand it is a privilege to have business here. And we need to compete for business to come here. And right now, in other nations, they get 10, 12, 15% corporate taxes. And in America, we charge them 30% corporate taxes. There is over $2 trillion of American corporate money in banks offshore that if we offered them the opportunity to bring that money back into the economy at a 10% rate, that would put $200 billion into the federal government while putting $2 trillion into our economy, into the corporations that are here. That would, needless to say, be a nice bump. And so those are the two things that I firmly believe in, that we must start competing to get business back into America. And number two, we have to take all of the tax burden off of the poor. And if we do a little bit of a sales tax, use tax on top of doing the income tax, and we kick those numbers around hither and yon, great, fine, and wonderful. But regardless of all of that, giving the opportunity for the poor to get out from under.
Describe your stance on the abortion pro-choice issue.
This is by far the most interesting, complicated issue in all of running for presidency, because, well, let me say right up front, if somebody passed a bill, I would sign it. If somebody passed a bill that said no more abortions, I would sign it. I wouldn't hesitate to do that. I think abortion is murder. It's wrong. It never should have happened. America should never have given Americans an actual right to murder unborn babies. But we have reached a point, and I'm a Christian guy. As a Christian guy, I am focused on spiritual things. I'm focused on eternal things. Babies that are killed in the womb are in the Lord's hands. It is a sad and unfortunate thing that 1 million babies are murdered every year. And like I said, it should be against the law. It's wrong. But the reality to me is, and the thing that really just tears my heart out, and every time I think about it, I start to tear up, is the fact that there are 1 million women in this country who are in such a spiritually dark, emotionally distressed place that the idea of murdering their unborn child is actually a good option in their minds. And that, for me, as a Christian and a preacher and teacher of a gentle, loving Savior, that to me is the most distressing and terrible thing. And to try to go down the path of making it illegal, I do not honestly think that will do a single thing to end abortion in America. If there's nothing that we haven't, we should learn from history that every time we have tried a prohibition, whether it's alcohol, whether it's been drugs, whether it's been same-sex marriage, it doesn't work. The power of the Christian church is not in government and courts, and if we want to see abortions come to an end, then we need to reach into the heart and soul of the women of America. And as President of the United States, this is my one absolute promise. Every month, I will address the American people, and I will address how many people died in car accidents, how many died in our wars, how many died in service to the country in the line of duty, and how many died in abortions. And I will plead with every woman out there not to do this to themselves, not focusing on saving the lives of babies, but focusing on the heart and the spirit and the soul of these women, because every woman who kills her own baby kills a part of herself, and that part of your heart stays hardened for the rest of your life, and it is a place you never get to go to. It is permanent. It sticks with you all of your life, and that is something we need to try to get women to stop doing to themselves. And for that reason, if I'm president, I promise the American people I will address that issue from that point every month, and I guarantee you that will put an end to more abortions than changing a law.
What role should our military play in the world?
You know, we are still blessed as a nation to be a nation that the rest of the world is still looking for leadership. Our military is used a little wrongly by the United Nations, and I think most people agree with that. I think, for instance, ISIS is probably a good example. There are nations around them right now fighting that battle who have a vested interest in it, and we do have a vested interest in it. But we really need to say our military as a part of their military, so that we send them 100,000 troops and we mingle them within a million of their troops, so that 1 in 10 is our military. And if we can help train, that's fine. Frankly, Israel has one of the greatest militaries anyway. But even the Saudis and a few other folk who are fighting the fight, we need to support them, but not necessarily go in there and make this our war. We just need to support their efforts at whatever. But I am, of course, I'm also a sci-fi guy, so let me just say this. I do have this idea in my head, and whether or not it could be accomplished, I don't know, but I actually think it could. And that would be to make up 1 million small drones that go in and seek out and kill individuals instead of putting people on the ground, to be able to do that. And of course, if we pay for them the way the military pays for them, they'll cost $1 million each, but we could probably get a private contractor to do it for $100 each. So that finding ways to not kill hundreds of thousands of civilians in the midst of it, human beings are human beings, and they should matter to us, and life should matter to us. And so fighting a radical religion should not require killing the people who are around them. And we have to find a better way, as much as I hate to say it, a better way to do war, so that the horrors of war are felt by the people who choose to be in them.
How would you handle immigration and border security? Monitoring
our borders, blocking off our borders, it sounds it sounds personally crazy when you start talking. It's not as crazy to talk about a fence or a wall across our southern border, but our northern border has become as much of a danger to America as our southern border. America is a target for the radical Islamic folk, and they're coming up from the south, they're coming down from the north, and we are going to have to find a way to more closely monitor those issues and be able to determine. And can we build a wall? I like the idea of a wall across Mexico, but once again, the people who come into America, particularly from the South, so many of them are running away from war and getting killed, and they are refugees more than they are just illegal immigrants. They are people trying to survive and putting their life at risk and in danger in order to do so. And it is hard for me to see Americans be so hard-hearted to that reality. Again, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and we have presidential candidates who just feed the anger and frustration, and that's not good for anybody. It's a tough issue because we're talking human beings to begin with, but at the same time, we're also talking national security. We are a target for people who do not like Christianity, who do not like America as a whole. So we have to secure those borders. Exactly how? I'm not 100% sure. I will bet when any of these people become president, they're going to learn things that they don't know now. That's what always happens. You get folks who step into office and they make all of these promises, but then when they get into office, they learn things and discover that A, they can't do what they wanted to do, or B, they don't want to do what they wanted to do. That's a simple reality that we have to sit down and figure it out, because it is going to be a problem continually.
How do you perceive the issues of race and discrimination in our country? Do we still face challenges? How would you address these issues?
Yes, we obviously still face challenges. We still have so many problems. I spent the first 13 years of my Christian life in an all-black church in what you would almost call an inner-city area of Charleston, South Carolina. In fact, the church that I went to for 13 years was right around the corner from the church where the shootings were. All of the people that I knew in the church that I went to had a very specific attachment to people who were in that other church who were shot. So clearly, there are still white supremacists in America. There are still people who think somewhere along the lines that black folk are less than white folk. There is every reason for, as far as I'm concerned, I've never understood white folk hating black people. I really haven't, but I understand black folk hating white folk. They were, even in the 1960s and into the early 70s, there was still so much hate and discrimination against black folk that the generation that's growing up right now is only one generation removed from all of that. They've been raised under it. They were, children people my age, black folk my age, were not allowed to eat in certain restaurants or drink from certain places and had to sit at the back of the bus and all of that stuff. It's not old. It's still in their lives. It's still new. They have every right to have a certain hatred because of that. Like I said, I've never understood white folk having that hatred. But again, I spent 13 years in a black church. So is there a problem? Yes, there is a problem. And I honestly believe, first of all, the church could address it and maintain it and fix it simply by getting into particularly some of the white churches, getting into some of those black neighborhoods and starting to reach out and touch and deal with and just establish those relationships. I think president of the United States, and one we have now, I think has inflamed a lot of the racism. I think we've had other presidents who have inflamed a lot of the racism, and I think we need a president who once again leads the people. Treats America like a family and leads the people and tries to influence toward peace. I'm in Rockford, Illinois. We just had recently a meeting of the white churches and the black churches that are separated by the river. We all came together on the bridge, and we read statements of repentance, and we got together and we worshiped and we talked and we tried to bury the hatchet, and we're going down the path now of working together to change this city. And you're going to see this city more and more change, even while right now we're one of the most violent cities, and I think that's probably why we're doing that. But yes, of course, it's a problem. It's going to be a problem because there are always people who inflame it. And I don't want to speak any names, but it's not just black and white. Now we have folks who are running for office who are inflaming discrimination against Mexican Americans. And they don't take the time to realize that all of those little statements they make lead the nation toward it tearing apart the peace and the fabric of peace and the unity of the nation. And we just need a president who stops doing that.
What role should the federal government play in health care?
Boy. I'm going to go back to the Christian church again. I do that a lot. But if the church was full of people who followed the rules that Jesus set down, if they tithed their 10%, took care of the widows and orphans, the poor, the hungry, the homeless, they would also have enough money to make sure nobody ever lost their house. They could put an end to unemployment, for that matter, and they would be able to provide all the health care needs for everybody who needs it. The fact that the church has rejected its role in society as a whole, even though the church is made up of individuals, and there are some individuals doing the right thing, they're working on so much less than what they need. Less than 3% of Christians tithe anymore. So they're working on less than 3% of the money they should have to do that. What role should the government have? There are good plans out there where government provides for health care, but the one thing American people don't understand is that most of those national health care systems take away a lot of choice. Secondly, America spends 10 times as much money on the research and development of the different drugs and the different things in the medical world than these other nations do. And the reason these other nations can fund health care, we're spending $600 billion a year on health care, where the next nation is about 60 million, or 60 billion or something like that. I can't remember the numbers all of a sudden, but you get the point that we're already put $600 billion a year into health care even before we established this health care plan. So we are already funding health care for the entire world by virtue of funding the research and development to create the new drugs. And the one thing I think we should do is, if we're going to put that money in, that those drugs should be available for our citizens at a whole lot less money than they're available around the rest of the world. But the way the rest of the world works, they get the drugs cheaper, and we wind up spending the millions of dollars to buy drugs that the federal government already paid for their development. So what position does the government play in health care? I'd rather not see a national health care plan. I'd rather see the Christian community step up and start being what it's supposed to be. But until that happens, we need to establish a plan that is similar to what other governments do. And that means that the federal government takes bids on mechanical knees. And whoever puts in the lowest bid to provide mechanical knees provides all the knees for the entire nation that are paid for by the government. And we do the same thing with drugs, and we do the same thing with everything else, so that we get the lowest prices possible. Because landing that contract for an entire nation means you can sell them at a whole lot less cost. And those are the simple things that we could do to make a national health care system work in America. But do remember that for the most part, Texas is bigger than most of the countries who provide health care for all of their people. There's a huge difference in the size of this country and the number of people we would have to provide health care to.
What priority would you give repair of infrastructure? What should the federal government's role be in maintaining infrastructure?
Huge, really. Particularly, we have so many U.S. highways that bridges are hazardous. You know, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, and they used to have two bridges that went across the Cooper River Bridge, and they had a run that went across there. And when you cross the bridge, you actually crossed places where the steel grating had holes in it because it had rusted through and broken. You could look at the stanchions underneath and see they were crumbling. Now there's a nice new bridge there finally. But all the different places I've lived, there are what should be considered federal bridges that are in such disrepair that they should have been repaired when they were at 40%, and now they're at 18% and 12%. Those are huge things that need to be done. Obviously, the electrical infrastructure in many ways the government should have some impact on, but a lot of that should be covered by private enterprise as well. Our roads most of them are necessary. And what the government does as far as giving money to states and to counties and to cities, I think is right and proper for maintaining our infrastructure. And when I think infrastructure, I mostly think roads. Infrastructure is also buildings and whatnot, but that should stay private.
Where do you stand on personal privacy and the need to protect our nation from terrorism? What is the proper balance between looking out for all the little shady plans to get our nation, but also to make sure Uncle Sam isn't listening to our whispers in our bedroom?
Frankly, I don't care if Uncle Sam listens to my whispers in my bedroom. I don't care if he knows what color underwear I wear, and I'm not a privacy person. I think the idea that we put so much emphasis on our privacy is a little crazy. In fact, most of our teenagers get in trouble because their parents decide they need their privacy, and so that's why they're on the internet doing stuff they ought not to be, because we've gotten crazy about our privacy. At the same time, I accept the fact there are people that are crazy about our privacy, but we live in a completely different world. Privacy is the place where terrorism grows. And, the more privacy we allow, the more terrorism grows, the more enemies grow. Is there a balancing act to that? I'm afraid of all of the things that I would say that maybe the American people want to reject. I prefer the safety and security of an open society than I do the idea of privacy that supports growth for terrorism. So I'm afraid I am definitely more than willing to give up any and all of my privacy. And it's not like my next door neighbor gets to see everything I'm doing, and the people around me get to see everything I'm doing. We're talking about the government, and because of the Orwellian idea of Big Brother, people get so afraid of that. But and yes, we do have the potential for government to use it wrongly and badly. But there's so much angst and anger and frustration in America today that it's almost impossible for the government to separate the actual terrorists from people who are just venting. And, maybe if we could get people in America to live together in peace and harmony and stop all the little civil wars and the hatred and intolerance, maybe we could go back to having more personal privacy, because it would be easier to tell who the terrorists are. But right now, the common average American, in many ways, is some form of a terrorist. That may be extreme, but it's constant about how we want to beat up these people and kill those people and send those ones out of town, and it's just tough. It's tough because this world is tough, and without the ability of government to get all of that going on, we're never going to be safe again. So I'm sorry, I like safety more than I like my privacy. I'll be happy to tell you what color my underwear is if it means somebody doesn't come and blow up my church.
All right, the next question, I usually couch this in language so people don't be threatened by the question, but you're pretty out there with this. So what role does faith, religion, spirituality, etc. play in your life? And what type of role would it play for you as president?
Well, obviously in my life, I'm a fanatic pretty much about Jesus. I am a firm believer that Jesus was a fanatic about his faith in God. And if I'm going to be a Christian, then I'm supposed to follow Jesus, and I should be a fanatic about that as well. I also believe that Jesus was very clear about what we were supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. One of the things that the Lord never, ever suggested to his people, and one of the things I'm really trying to get the Christian community to grab onto and to grasp, is the fact that in all of his teachings, the Lord never said, go into the world, make disciples, baptize them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Ghost, and if you run into people who don't agree with you, form yourselves into gangs and bully them into submission. That is just not something Jesus did or said. The Christian church that existed when Jesus ascended into heaven was the most powerful church that ever existed. And that church was able to bring all of the wicked decadence of the most powerful empire in human history and the most decadent empire in human history to its knees. And that church operated in humility and meekness and quietness, and it just went about its business talking to people about what Jesus did and going person to person and village to village. And that church had power. But when Rome made the church part of government, the church quit doing things the way that Jesus said to. And unfortunately, see, our founding fathers, when they founded this nation, they founded it with an idea. First of all, the church, the Bible is very kind of clear in what it doesn't say. And what it doesn't say is what I was just talking about. But secondly, our founding fathers saw what happened when government got a hold, or when church got a hold of government, and they made a point of establishing a constitution and a government where the church could not do that anymore. Ever here. And now we have Christians who are advocating undercutting that foundation to our Constitution and to our country. And for that reason, I am a firm believer, and again, this is on the Christian fanatic side of things, but I do believe that the chastisement of God is being felt in America, but the chastisement of God is on the Christian church for rejecting God's way of doing things. And he is showing us that every time we turn to the government to force a morality on people, we empower Satan. That is not the power of the Christian church. We have no power, and the government has no power to do anything about the moral decline of the nation, period. And so when we try to use government to force a religion upon people, we do it contrary to the plans that Jesus set down for us. And so for me as president, I will stand up and I will speak Jesus. I will try to do everything I can to bring a message of revival to the Christian church. If you're going to lead the nation, you have to lead the Christian church. But we cannot let Christians use government and courts to force a particular doctrine upon other Christians. It's not just that they're fighting against a particular sin or this or that. There are Christians in America who do not agree with what other Christians are trying to do. And the aggressive attack against sinners, that does not come from Jesus. That comes from humanism and from a real rejection of who Jesus really is. And the reason I wanted to run for president more than anything was to be a representative of the gentle, kind Jesus who wouldn't extinguish a smoking flax or bend a gentle reed. I mean, the one who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God," who said, "Turn the other cheek and walk the extra mile, and if they take you to court, give them more than what they ask for." Interesting thing about America right now, Christians are like, hey, they're taking us to court, so we have to go fight them. Well, no, we don't. We have to follow what Jesus said. Our power to put an end to, if you want to put an end to homosexuals and the end to same-sex marriage and an end to abortion, you do it the way the Christian church did it when it first started in the Roman Empire, where there was homosexual worship of gods, where they were burning their children in worship to gods and other idols. All of that came to an end when Christians did what they were supposed to do. And if Christians would lead the way of peace and love and unity in America, then America would return to being, because like I said, 70% of the population claim to be Christians. And that doesn't necessarily mean they are Christians, but it means they don't hate Jesus. And if we had somebody who would just lead them back to being the peacemakers that Jesus said for us to be, then they would determine what society is. And if the other 30% of society still decides it wants to be wicked and evil, it'll be wicked and evil. Christians will still have a society of their own that would be what Jesus said for us to be.
All right. Be a political forecaster. Predict two major problems, maybe one or two, facing our country in the future that very few people are talking about. What would you do to prepare America for these things?
You know what our biggest thing is going to be? Let me preface this, because nobody is saying it, and it is still an absolute truth. A long time ago, a guy named Yasser Arafat wrote a book. And in his book, he said the primary goal of the Palestinians would be to establish a state within the confines of Israel from which to launch attacks against Israel. Now, for some reason, after he wrote that book, the rest of the world decided to ignore what he wrote in that book and start supporting Palestine being a state. And ever since then, they have used Palestine to launch attacks against Israel. That same strategy is being played out in all different nations throughout Europe and now in America. In my platform, I have specifically said no Sharia law. And I will be perfectly blunt to say any Muslim who wants Sharia law in America is not a moderate. You must be a radical to want Sharia law. And that is the biggest problem. And it is a really big problem because as President of the United States, or as a senator, or as a member of the House, you are supposed to represent all Americans, which means we are a nation that is wide open for this idea. And when we keep letting Muslims chase us out of areas, that is going to allow them to create their own cities, their own counties, their own areas where they will launch attacks against America. And you know what? Nobody's saying it, but it is still the truth. It is going to happen.
All right. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses, things they're very, very good at, and things they're not so good at. What are some of the things you're maybe not so good at, and what would you do to make up for those things?
Well, I'm really horrible at politics, and I have no idea yet what I'm going to do to make up for that. That whole running for office thing, that's just a brutal and unique and strange thing. I've never been ambitious, and I've never wanted to be rich, and I've never wanted to have power or lord over people. I really only want to influence. So this whole process of just giving up my simple life to try and make a difference is, a process. My weaknesses, I guess, is I'm not a really good student. But I remember somebody once saying, and I firmly believe, you don't actually have to be the best. You have to surround yourself with the best. And so even though I know that there's a lot I don't know and a lot I don't know how to do, I know people who do know how to do those things. And so as president, I will simply make sure there are people around me who get the things done that I don't know how to do. The truth is, no president runs the country on his own.
Are there any other issues you would like to discuss?
I think we've pretty much covered it.
Okay. And just time for some closing remarks in 2 minutes or less. Tell us why we should vote for you.
Because I represent the common man. I realize that Americans are convinced they need some great corporate person, but, the rich elite are used to borrow, declare bankruptcy, borrow, declare bankruptcy. You put them in government, and it's just borrow. There is no declare bankruptcy. And we have career politicians who want to tell you that they've balanced budgets. Well, they balance budgets by exploiting the poor. And I guess exploiting the poor is probably back on that other issues that we didn't discuss. I really want to see us lower interest rates, but the truth is that states balance their budget by selling lottery tickets to people and selling pie-in-the-sky dreams, and also they balance their budget by getting billions of dollars from the federal government. When you become a federal government person, you don't have that great pile of money above you. And so I really wish the American people would realize that they know more about how to run this country than the rich elite and the career politicians. And that would probably be the best reason to vote for me. It's not because I know everything there is to know, but I do understand what it is to eat a peanut butter sandwich when you want to have a steak. I know what it is to not pay for things or not buy things that you cannot afford. And it seems like Americans, our leadership doesn't have that concept in their head. They don't know what it is like to not pay for things they can't afford. That's why we have an $18 trillion debt. And my plan would pay off that debt and would take care of our poor working class and our senior citizens. And we really have to take care of the veterans. I actually spent 9 years in the Navy, and I also used the VA health system. And so I am very familiar with the fact that we have to fix that. We have to stop treating our senior citizens and our veterans like they're disposable. Like we've used them up, now let's throw them away. We should make them a priority, and we should reward them in their old age for holding this country together so that the next generation can have an America. And so other than all of the other things, I think we have covered pretty much everything. The truth is, because I could do the job, and I could do the job the way I'd like to think most Christians would like to see it done.
Thank you, Mr. Newland, for participating in the interview, and thanks to my listeners for listening to the interview. Be sure to check back in the future for more candidate interviews. Have a good day, and remember to keep informed, stay passionate, and most of all, get involved. Thanks again, Mr. Newland.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.